What's up guys, welcome to my channel. In this video we're going to be covering a number of different exercises within a structured routine which are designed to improve the symptoms of hyperlordosis, which is also known as anterior pelvic tilt. This routine alone won't cure your symptoms overnight, but it will help improve your posture by strengthening the glutes and abdominals and also stretching the psoas muscle and the muscles of the erector spinae. So hyperlordosis is excessive curvature of the lumbar spine, also known as anterior pelvic tilt, and this causes the hips to be pushed out back and your stomach to be pushed out front, and can often lead to pain and discomfort over time, as you have a general tightness in your back and your hips due to the weakness in your glutes and abdominals. So from the causes I'm listing on the screen, the first three are avoidable, where you can consciously correct your mistakes. So if you have any form of injury, spinal condition or neuromuscular disease, then you need to contact your physician or physiotherapist before taking part in any form of exercise. Let's jump in with the first exercise of the routine, glute bridge. Begin flat on your back with your spine as flush to the mat as possible, with your feet hip width apart, toes pointing forward. Now it's very important that you begin your lift by tucking your pelvis and rolling up to your top range of motion. A good little technique to fully engage your glutes is to press your feet away from your body, and you also want to maintain a posterior pelvic tilt throughout the motion. Okay, so let's jump into the rep range. We're going to be aiming for 8 repetitions in a nice slow and controlled manner. Just try to remember those techniques. So you want to keep your feet perfectly in line with the hips pointing forward, and then you're pressing your feet away from your body as you tuck your pelvis and roll up to the top range of motion. Nice, slow and controlled, so there's no rushing with mobility training. It's about going through the range of motion in a nice controlled manner, feeling your own body out, as everyone's body is unique. You want to be really mindful of keeping that posterior pelvic tilt throughout all repetitions. This first exercise is really great for building strength in the glutes, which is usually a weak area for people suffering with anterior pelvic tilt. Okay, so for the second exercise of the routine, we're going to begin from the same position. We want to raise our legs to a 90-degree angle, with the knee slightly past the hip joint so the core is fully engaged. You want to also maintain a slight posterior pelvic tilt, so you're tucking the pelvis slightly. If you struggle to do this, you can place your hands underneath your hips, and that's going to force you to keep your back straight and avoid you arching your low back. Okay, so let's jump into the repetitions. We're going to be doing 8 reps in total, 4 extensions each side. So like you can see, as I'm extending the leg, I'm maintaining the position with the other leg. There's no rushing with this. You're going to feel a slight burn in your core, but it's all good. You strengthen those abdominal muscles. Okay, on to the third exercise. So as you can see, you want to drop your feet nice and wide, and then you're just keeping the bend in your knees and dropping your knees side to side. So you're both internally and externally rotating the hip joint. This one feels really good after just doing them first 2. So you can play around with the positioning of your feet and the depth of your range of motion. Depending if you're experiencing any pain, then just ease up. If we want to feel a deeper stretch, you can go a little bit further with the motion. Alright, you probably guessed it, we're going to do 8 repetitions. 8's the magic number in this routine. The main reason being is when you say 10 repetitions to people, they usually rush. But mobility training, we want to be quality movement, feeling your body out and feeling what feels good for your body. This exercise is best done when you do it in an effortless motion. No forcing, just letting the body loose. Alright guys, get yourselves set for exercise number 4, reverse plank bridge reach, which is quite an advanced movement to be honest. So if you feel any pain whilst practicing this movement, just skip this one out. It's great for strengthening your glutes, whilst giving you a nice little stretch in your core and your spine. You want to begin with your feet hip width apart and your hands shoulder width apart, and then as you raise your hips, you're pressing into the floor and reaching up to the sky with the alternate hand. Then lower back to the floor and repeat the process on the other side. And like with majority of the exercise in this routine, you want to maintain a slight posterior pelvic tilt, as conscious awareness is one of the main tools in correcting your anterior pelvic tilt. Okay, so let's jump into our reps. We're going to do 8 repetitions, 4 each side. And if you're struggling to keep up with my pace, you can do 4 repetitions, 2 each side. If you're struggling to keep your hips off the mat throughout the full range of motion, you can lower your hips to the mat and take a slight seat in between reps. But then just make sure you're tucking the pelvis as you raise the hips to start the next repetition. Or if you want to do it like I'm doing, you can maintain a slight hover off the mat throughout all range of motion, which makes sure you're keeping that slight posterior pelvic tilt, keeping the core engaged. And like always, just go nice, slow and controlled, no matter which option you choose. For exercise number 5, you want to begin laid flat on your back, pelvis tucked with your spine nice and flush to the mat. And then we're going to hug one knee into the body as you completely straighten out the other leg. And all we're going to do is just slowly alternate between both positions. For the legs is being extended out straight, you should feel your core turn on that side. And then you should also feel a nice stretch in the hamstring on the side where the leg is being hugged into the body. Okay, so now we know the technique, let's begin the repetitions. We're going to aim for 8 reps. Just going at a nice methodical pace, feeling the motion out in a nice slow and controlled manner. If you haven't done much exercise previous to doing this video, then your core should be feeling a little bit shaky at this point, as you've engaged a lot of your abdominal muscles with the previous exercises. This exercise we're currently on is great for strengthening the abdominals and also strengthening the hip flexors, as well as stretching out those tight hamstrings, which can often be a byproduct of hyperlordosis. Alright guys, we're flying through this. Let's jump on to exercise number 6, which is cat-cow. We want to begin in a tabletop position with our knees hip width apart, hands shoulder width apart, with your arms fully locked out straight. We want to avoid having our toes tucked up at the back. You want to keep the tops of your feet flush with the mat. And a little technique I like to use is spreading the fingertips and gripping the ground. Alright, so now we know the technique, let's jump straight in. We're not going to have a strict rep count for this, you're just going to do as many as you feel is right for you. Beginning with the cat variation, you want to draw your core up into your spine and round your back as you exhale fully. Then you want to inhale through your diaphragm as you drop the belly, arch the back and slide the gaze forward for the cow variation. This exercise is going to stretch both your erector spinae muscles as well as the muscles in your abdominals. So for the cat variation, when you're rounding your back, you're going to get deep stretches in your erector spinae. And then for the cow variation, where you're dropping the belly, arching the back, you're going to get deep stretches within the abdominals. The cat-cow is also a very popular yoga position, which is why I'm emphasizing about the breath, as it really helps you to deepen the stretch. If you exhale and inhale, focus on your breathing as you're moving through each aspect of the movement. Alright guys, get ready for the next exercise, which is also a very popular yoga position. You're going to alternate between child pose and cobra pose. So for child pose, you want to send your hips back towards your feet and you're going to tuck your pelvis in the process. Then for the cobra position, you want to lift out of the child pose in a slow controlled manner and then send your hips forward as far as possible, aiming to rest your hips on the mat. Okay, so now we've got the technique in mind, let's go through some repetitions. Like with the previous, we're not going to count reps, we're just going to go through the motion, alternating between child pose, cobra pose. ensuring that we're keeping that posterior pelvic tilt throughout, keeping your pelvis tucked. So for child pose, we want to make sure our hips are heavy and we're aiming to rest the backs of our legs on the backs of our heels. And for cobra pose, we want to make our hips heavy again with the pelvis tucked, and then you're slightly arching the spine and then just slightly gazing up to the ceiling without straining your neck. The child pose is really good for stretching out all the muscles in the erector spinae, which run up and down the spine, as well as giving you a bit of a stretch in your shoulders if you're fully extending the arms. And then the cobra pose is really good for stretching out those hip flexors as well as your abdominals. A little technique I like to use for child pose is similar to how you do it in cat-cow, where you're tucking your core up into your spine and trying to round your back. Also, you can play about with your knee space. If you feel like you're not getting the right stretch, you can widen your knees. Okay guys, you made it to the final exercise of the routine, which is called lunge hip to hamstring flow. And this exercise begins with one knee on the mat with the other leg out front in a lunge position, so in a 90-degree angle with the foot flat. The hip aspect of the movement requires you to send your hips forward with your pelvis slightly tucked, which is not just going to mobilize your core and your abdominals, but also a muscle deep within your core called the psoas muscle, which connects your legs to your hip to your spine, and is very often really tight for people suffering with anterior pelvic tilt. Then for the hamstring aspect of the movement, you want to send your hips back as you reach down towards the mat, keeping a slight bend in that knee and pointing your toes up to the ceiling. Okay guys, so like with the two previous exercises, we're not adhering to a strict rep count, but we want to make sure we do equal amount on both sides. Keeping in mind those techniques, the main thing is to keep that pelvis slightly tucked to avoid the anterior pelvic tilt. You're keeping the core braced and reaching up to the sky for the hip aspects of the movement, and slowly and controlled transitioning back and forth. You'll find that with each repetition, your body can go slightly further with its range of motion as your body loosens up and warms to the movement. Okay, you should be thinking about swapping sides at this point guys, switching legs and getting the movement on both sides. Make sure that we're keeping that pelvis tucked, especially for the hip aspects of the movement. When you're sending your hips forward and reaching up to the sky, you want to keep that pelvis tucked so you're getting a deep stretch in the hip and in the psoas. And then when you go into the hamstring aspect, you want to keep a slight bend in the knee, keep the foot pointing up so you get a stretch through the full hamstring, and also a little bit of your erector spinae as you're reaching down towards the mat. Alright guys, and this wraps up the mobility routine, and if you haven't already, make sure to like and subscribe.